The loneliest part of getting everything you wanted. An emotional story inspired by Lonely. When people ask me what I wanted when I was younger, I usually give them the same answer. Money. A lot of money. Enough that I never had to check my bank account before buying something. Enough that my parents wouldn't have to worry about bills anymore. Enough that if I wanted something, I could just get it. And eventually, I got it. That's the part people don't usually understand. I actually got everything I wanted. The nice apartment. The expensive car. The job that made people say, "You made it." I could eat wherever I wanted. Travel whenever I wanted. Buy things I couldn't even afford to dream about when I was 20. And for a while, I thought I'd finally won. I was 34 when my life started looking successful from the outside. I had a corner office. A good salary. A closet full of clothes I barely wore. A refrigerator filled with food I kept forgetting to eat. And a living room that looked like nobody lived there. I used to think that was what success looked like. Clean. Quiet. Expensive. I grew up in a small apartment with my mother. Money was always tight. Not desperately tight. Just tight enough that you noticed. We counted groceries. We waited for sales. When something broke, my mother would say, "We'll fix it next month." Sometimes next month became next year. I hated that. I hated watching her put things back on store shelves because they cost too much. So I made myself a promise. One day, we'd never have to do that again. I started working young. After school. Weekends. Whatever it paid. I wasn't particularly talented. I wasn't some genius who knew exactly what he wanted to do. I was just stubborn. I wanted money. And I wanted out. When I got my first decent job, I started working harder than everyone around me. Then I got promoted. Then promoted again. I stopped taking weekends off. I stopped going out. I stopped answering messages during work. At first, my friends complained. "You're always busy." I'd laugh. "That's because I'm trying to get rich." They'd make fun of me. I'd make fun of them. And then I'd go back to work. I thought they'd understand. Eventually, they stopped asking. That part happened so slowly I barely noticed. My best friend, Marcus, used to call me every Friday. "You're coming out tonight." "No." That wasn't a question. "I'm working." "You're always working." "I'll come next week." Next week became next month. Then one day, Marcus called while I was sitting in a meeting. I looked at his name. I declined the call. I told myself I'd call him later. I didn't. The next morning, he sent me a message. "We're having a baby." I stared at the screen. I smiled. Then I typed, "Congratulations, man. I'm really happy for you." He replied, "Thanks. Wish you were here." I looked at my calendar. There was a meeting at 9. Another at 11. Lunch with a client. A presentation at 3. I told myself I'd visit soon. I didn't. Years passed. My mother kept asking when I'd come home for dinner. I'd say, "Mom, I'm busy." She'd laugh. "You've been busy for 10 years. I'll come Sunday." Promise. Promise. Sometimes I kept the promise. Most times, I didn't. But I was doing it for her. That's what I told myself. Every promotion. Every late night. Every missed birthday. Every dinner I skipped. It was for her. Then I finally bought her a house. I remember handing her the keys. She stared at them. Then at me. What's this? Your house? She laughed. Then she realized I wasn't joking. She started crying. I hugged her. For the first time in years, I felt like everything I'd sacrificed had been worth it. She walked around the house, touching things. The kitchen. The windows. The bedroom. She kept saying, "It's too much." I told her, "You deserve it." She looked at me. Then he said something I didn't understand until much later. I would have been happy with more dinners. I laughed. "Mom, I'm serious. I'll have dinner with you." "When?" I paused. She smiled sadly. "Exactly. I promised her I'd make more time." I meant it. I really did. But then work got busy again. Another project. Another promotion. Another reason to stay late. And eventually, I stopped noticing how often I was saying, "Next time." Until one afternoon, my mother called me. I was sitting in my new office. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below me. My name on the door. Everything I'd wanted. Everything I'd worked for. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. "Mom." I smiled. Then answered, "Hey, Mom." She didn't speak immediately. And somehow, before she said anything, I knew something was wrong. She didn't sound like herself. "Mom, I'm okay." That was her favorite lie. I leaned back in my chair. "What happened?" "Nothing happened." "Mom." She laughed softly. "I just wanted to hear your voice." I looked at the clock. I had another meeting in 20 minutes. Of course. There was a pause. Then she said, "Are you eating properly?" I smiled. "Yes." "Sleeping?" "Sometimes." "Still working too much?" "Probably." She laughed. "Then you're still my son." I smiled. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing important. She told me about the neighbor's dog. I told her about a restaurant I'd tried. She asked when I'd visit. I said, "Sunday." She said, "Promise." I said, "Promise." We hung up. I went back to work. Sunday came. I didn't go. There was a problem at work. Then another. By the time I looked at my phone, it was almost midnight. I called her. No answer. I sent a message. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up. I'll make it up to you." She didn't reply. The next morning, she called. I answered while walking into the office. "Hey." She sounded tired. "Good morning. Everything okay?" "Yes." Another pause. Then she said, "Don't worry about coming this Sunday." I stopped walking. "Why?" "I'll be busy." "Doing what?" She laughed. "Being your mother." I smiled. "Mom, I'm fine." I didn't push. I should have. I didn't. A few weeks later, I got another promotion. My salary increased. My office got bigger. My mother called to congratulate me. I told her I was going to take her somewhere nice. She said, "I'd rather you come home." I laughed. "You always say that." "Because you never do." I went quiet. She changed the subject. A month later, I finally went to see her. She looked smaller. That was the first thing I noticed. Not sick. Not dramatically different. Just smaller. I hadn't seen her in almost 3 months. She opened the door. Then smiled. "You came." Of course I came. She hugged me. I held her a little longer than usual. We had dinner together. Just the two of us. She made the food. I complained that she still used too much salt. She told me I was getting old. I laughed. After dinner, we sat outside. She asked about work. I told her about the promotion. She was proud. I could see it in her face. Then she asked, "Are you happy?" I looked at her. "What? Are you happy?" I laughed. "Yeah." She nodded. "Good." Then she looked toward the garden. That's all I ever wanted. I didn't know why that sentence bothered me. Maybe because I realized I had spent years trying to give her everything except the one thing she actually wanted. Me. Not my money. Not the house. Not the gifts. Just me sitting there. But I still didn't understand how serious it was. A few months later, I was in another city for work when my phone rang. It was my aunt. I answered. "Hey." She didn't say hello. She said, "Your mom is in the hospital." Everything around me suddenly became quiet. "What?" "She didn't want you to worry." I stood up. "What happened?" She collapsed at home. I don't remember the rest of the conversation clearly. I remember asking which hospital. I remember grabbing my keys. I remember driving too fast. I remember calling my mother. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I called my aunt. Then the hospital. Then my mother again. I kept looking at my phone like somehow staring at it would make her answer. When I finally reached the hospital, my aunt was sitting outside the room. She stood when she saw me. I knew from her face. I just knew. My mother was awake. But she looked tired. I walked into the room. She smiled. "You're here." I wanted to say something. Anything. Instead, I sat beside her. She looked at me. "You look terrible." I laughed. It came out broken. "You almost died and you're making fun of me." She smiled. "You're still too serious." I took her hand. It felt so small. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked away. "You were working." I shook my head. "Mom." I didn't want to interrupt. "You're my mother." "I know." "Then call me." She looked at me. "I did." That stopped me. She wasn't angry. That's what hurt. She just looked tired. "I called you many times." I couldn't speak. She squeezed my hand. "Don't make that face." "What face?" "That guilty one." I looked down. She said, "You were trying to build a good life." I swallowed. "I was trying to build it for you." She smiled. "I know." Then she looked toward the window. But I wanted to be in it. I couldn't hold it together anymore. I started crying. Quietly. Like I was embarrassed to be doing it. My mother reached over and touched my face. "Hey." I shook my head. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "Everything." She sighed. "Don't waste time apologizing for time." I looked at her. "Then what am I supposed to do?" She smiled. "Use what's left." She recovered. At least that's what everyone said. She went home. I went back to work. But something had changed. I started going home earlier. I started calling her during lunch. I started visiting on Sundays. Not every Sunday. But enough. Sometimes we'd eat together. Sometimes we'd sit quietly. Sometimes she'd tell me the same story she'd already told me 3 times. I stopped correcting her. Because I finally understood something. I had spent years believing I needed to make my mother proud. She already was. I just hadn't been around long enough to hear it. Then, slowly, other things started changing too. I called Marcus. We hadn't spoken properly in years. I stared at his name for almost a minute before pressing call. He answered. Hello. I didn't know what to say. So I said, Hey. There was silence. Then he laughed. Look who finally remembers my number. I laughed too. We talked for almost 2 hours. He told me about his daughter, his wife, his house, his life. I told him about mine. And when we hung up, I realized something uncomfortable. I had money. I had success. I had everything I'd promised myself I'd get. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped having people to call. And suddenly, my huge apartment didn't feel impressive anymore. I started noticing how quiet my apartment was. Not peaceful. Quiet. There's a difference. Peaceful is when you choose silence. Quiet is when you realize nobody is coming home. I had a dining table that could seat 8 people. I usually ate at one end of it. Sometimes I'd order expensive food and eat it while watching television. Sometimes I'd pour myself a drink and stand by the window. The city outside was always alive. Cars. People. Lights. Music from somewhere down the street. Thousands of people living their lives. And somehow, I felt completely alone. So I started calling people. Not because I needed anything. Just because I wanted to hear someone's voice. Marcus and I started talking again. Not every day. But often. Sometimes he'd call while driving his daughter to school. Sometimes I'd call him after work. One night, he said, "You know what you should do?" "What?" "Come over. Now." "Yeah. It's 10. So." I laughed. "You have a kid. She's asleep. And your wife. She's watching television. She'll kill me. Probably." I smiled. Then grabbed my keys. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed being somewhere I didn't have to be impressive. His house was messy. His daughter had left toys everywhere. There were dishes in the sink. His wife yelled at him from another room. And I loved every second of it. We sat in the kitchen eating leftovers. Marcus looked at me. "You're different." I frowned. "How?" "You used to complain about having no money. Now I complain about taxes." He laughed. "No." He pointed at me. "You actually look happy." I looked down at my food. I didn't know what to say. Because I wasn't sure. Not completely. But I knew I felt better sitting at his kitchen table than I had felt sitting alone in my apartment. A few months later, my mother called me. "Are you busy?" I was. But I said, "No." She smiled. "Good." She asked if I'd come over. I drove there that evening. We ate dinner. Afterward, she showed me an old box of photographs. I hadn't seen some of them in years. There was one of me at 6 years old. Missing a front tooth. There was one of my mother holding me on my first day of school. One from my graduation. One from the first apartment I ever rented. My mother held up another. It was me at 23. Standing beside a cheap car. I was smiling like I had just won the lottery. My mother laughed. You were so proud of that car. I loved that car. It broke down every week. Still loved it. She put the photograph down. Then said, you were happier then. I looked at her. What? She smiled. You were poor. I laughed. Thanks. I'm serious. She touched the photograph. You had nothing. I looked at the picture. Then she said, but you had people. That stayed with me. Because she was right. Back then, I had nothing. But if something happened, I knew exactly who I'd call. Now I had everything. And sometimes I didn't know who to call at all. That night, I asked my mother something I'd never asked before. Mom. Yeah. Do you think I've wasted my life? She looked at me. Not offended. Not surprised. Just thoughtful. No. I waited. You worked hard. Yeah. You helped me. Yeah. You're allowed to want more. I looked down. But. She smiled. There's always a but. I laughed quietly. She continued. Don't spend the rest of your life trying to prove that the first half was worth it. I stared at her. I didn't have an answer. She didn't need one. A year later, I left my company. Not immediately. I didn't walk into my boss's office and make some dramatic speech. I planned it. Saved enough money. Made sure I wasn't making a stupid decision. Then I left. People were shocked. Some thought I'd lost my mind. Others asked what I'd do next. I didn't know. And for the first time in my life, I was okay with not knowing. I started working less. I started having dinner with my mother every Sunday. I called Marcus more. I traveled. Not luxury trips. Sometimes just a weekend somewhere nearby. I started cooking. Badly. Very badly. Marcus once told me I had somehow managed to ruin eggs. I told him to shut up. He laughed. And slowly, my apartment started changing. There were photographs on the walls now. A jacket hanging over a chair. Books on the coffee table. A spare toothbrush in the bathroom when Marcus's daughter stayed over. A few things that weren't expensive. But they made the place feel lived in. One night, I stood in the kitchen making dinner. My mother was sitting at the table. Marcus was there too. His daughter was arguing with him about something. Everyone was talking. At the same time. I couldn't hear half of it. And suddenly, I stopped. I just stood there. Looking at them. My mother noticed. What? I smiled. Nothing. She rolled her eyes. You always say that. I laughed. Then I went back to cooking. That night, after everyone left, I cleaned the kitchen. Slowly. I looked around the apartment. It wasn't as perfect anymore. There were dishes in the sink. Cups on the table. A toy on the floor. Someone had left a jacket on my couch. And for the first time, I didn't want to clean everything up. I wanted to leave it there. Because the mess meant someone had been there. Someone had laughed. Someone had eaten. Someone had stayed. A few weeks later, I was sitting with my mother outside her house. She was looking at the garden. I asked her, "Do you remember when I bought you this place?" She smiled. Of course. I thought that was the moment I finally made it. She looked at me. You did? I smiled. Then she said, but you were happier when you came over every Sunday. I laughed. You're never going to let that go, are you? No. We sat quietly. Then she reached for my hand. You're here now. I looked at her. Yeah. That's enough. I squeezed her hand. And I think that was the first time I really understood what I'd been chasing all those years. It wasn't money. Not really. Money was just the thing I thought would guarantee everything else. Security. Respect. Freedom. Happiness. People. But money could buy a house. It couldn't fill the house. It could buy a beautiful dining table. It couldn't put people around it. It could buy the best food in the city. It couldn't make someone stay for dinner. I still have money now. I still like nice things. I didn't suddenly become some person who doesn't care about success. I care. But I don't worship it anymore. Because I learned something the hard way. You can spend your whole life building a life that looks beautiful. And still come home to an empty room. My mother is older now. Marcus has gray hair. His daughter is almost grown. And sometimes we sit around the same table and talk about how quickly everything happened. The strange thing is, I used to think loneliness meant having nobody. Now I know that's not always true. Sometimes loneliness is having people who love you. And being too busy to let them. Sometimes it's having a phone full of contacts. And nobody you feel comfortable calling. Sometimes it's having a house. And no one asking when you'll be home. I spent years trying to make sure I'd never be poor again. I succeeded. But somewhere along the way, I became poor in a completely different way. And I didn't realize it until I finally had everything. So if you ever ask me whether all that money was worth it, I honestly don't know. It gave me things I needed. It gave my mother a home. It gave me security. It gave me choices. But it never gave me the thing I was actually looking for. Because at the end of a long day, I don't want another expensive thing. I don't want another promotion. I don't want another empty room with a perfect view. I just want someone to call. And now, I have people to call. That's enough for me. Thank you for watching. Follow for more video like this.